I want you to imagine, for just a second, a writer, but like not just any writer.
Okay.
Picture a guy who is so intensely, almost terrifyingly devoted to his craft that he's living in a literal dairy barn.
Whoa.
Yeah, bathing in a nearby lake. He and his wife are basically eating beans to survive, and the phone rings.
Right.
Someone is offering him $2,000 to just come speak at a university about his books, which, back then is an absolute fortune when you're literally living in an unheated barn.
Oh, absolutely.
And he turns it down. He tells them everything I have to say is there on the page. And they just go back to eating beans for another week.
It's the ultimate rejection of the literary spotlight.
Yeah.
A complete and utter indifference to, well, anything outside of the work itself.
Yeah.
Which is a level of discipline most people simply cannot comprehend.
Exactly. So welcome to this custom deep dive. Today we're exploring the enigmatic life, the brutal, uncompromising themes, and the paradoxical genius of the man in that dairy barn, Cormac McCarthy. Okay, let's unpack this. Because we aren't just talking about a novelist today. We're looking at a man who lived a life of almost like monastic dedication to his art. He sacrificed practically everything for the written word.
And that is exactly what makes him so compelling to study. I mean, Cormac McCarthy is widely regarded today as one of the absolute greatest American novelists, a giant of literature.
Right, for sure.
But his path to that status was decades of obscurity, deliberate isolation, and an unwavering commitment to a very specific, very stark vision of the world.
Well, and you'd naturally assume a guy who ends up bathing in a lake and living in a barn came from nothing, right?
Right, like he was born into deep poverty and just never escaped it.
Exactly. But he wasn't. He was born Charles Joseph McCarthy Jr., and his father was actually a highly successful lawyer for the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yeah, they lived in an upscale subdivision.
Right. He grew up wealthy. So how does someone with that kind of safety net consciously choose to live in total destitution?
By actively stripping away the comforts and expectations of his upbringing. He didn't just walk away from the money, he rejected the entire identity prepared for him.
Right.
You can even see that in his name. He changed his name from Charles to Cormac, partially to avoid being compared to the famous ventriloquist dummy of the time, Charlie McCarthy.
Changing your name to avoid association with a ventriloquist dummy is such a brilliantly specific, stubborn detail.
It really is.
And that stubborn rejection of the expected path just, became the theme of his 20s. He enrolls at the University of Tennessee, drops out, joins the Air Force, gets stationed in Alaska.
And was actually up in Alaska, serving in the military, where he suddenly started reading voraciously.
Yeah.
It's like a switch flipped in the freezing cold.
And then he returns to college after that, drops out a second time, and just completely commits to the page.
Right. He decides he's simply not going to work a regular job. He actually told people he always knew he didn't want to work, that writing was his #1 priority.
And that decision didn't lead to sudden success. It plunged him into extreme poverty for a very, very long time.
Decades, yeah.
The details of this poverty are staggering. I was reading that he got evicted from a $40 a month room in the French Quarter of New Orleans because he couldn't scrape together the rent.
Wow.
And when he traveled, he carried a 100-watt light bulb in his bag.
Wait, really? Just a loose bulb?
This loose light bulb, so that no matter where he was sleeping, a cheap motel, a friend's couch, he could screw it into the lamp and ensure he had enough light to keep reading and writing deep into the night.
That's incredible. It
Yeah.
shows you how writing wasn't just something he did. It was an environmental necessity, like oxygen.
Yeah.
And then there's the dairy barn you mentioned earlier. He bought it in Tennessee with his second wife, Anne Delisle, and he renovated it entirely himself.
Literally did the stonework.
Yeah. When the writer James Agee's childhood home was being demolished in Knoxville, McCarthy went out, salvaged the bricks from the rubble, and used them to build the fireplaces in his own shack.
That is so symbolic.
Right. He was physically building his environment by hand,
Yeah.
stone by stone, brick by brick.
And his personal life, it reflects that same unconventional, restless energy. He was married 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the biographical record points out a relationship that started when he was 42 years old. He met a young woman named Augusta Britt at a motel in Arizona. She was 16 at the time.
Right.
They hit it off. He used their experiences as inspiration for his novel Setri. And the next year, when she was 17, they took a trip to Mexico where the relationship became physical.
Yeah, and they ended up remaining lifelong friends.
Exactly. And to be clear to you listening, our goal here is simply to impartially report the biographical facts as they exist in the text. We aren't taking a moral stance or endorsing his personal choices.
No, of course not.
But it really underscores how entirely detached he was from any kind of societal norm.
It absolutely does. He operated entirely on a different frequency than the rest of society, often at the great expense of conventional stability in those around him.
I do have to push back a little on this, though. We tend to romanticize the starving artist trope.
Yeah.
But is this actually admirable dedication, or is it just sheer selfish stubbornness? It's like he took a monastic vow of poverty, choosing to strip away every distraction, including basic comforts and sometimes his own family's financial stability, just to keep the creative channel pure.
Well, what's fascinating here is you're entirely right to call it stubbornness. From the outside, it looks incredibly selfish to subject your family to that kind of precarity over a $2,000 speaking fee.
Yeah.
But to understand him, you have to realize that writing wasn't a career trajectory for McCarthy. It was an all-consuming priority, a biological compulsion.
Right.
He wasn't playing the literary game. For his first decades, he was known as the best unknown novelist in America. Up until 1991, none of his books had sold more than 5,000 hardcover copies.
5,000 copies. Over decades of work. For a guy we now consider a legendary American author, you'd think after 10 years of selling barely any books, a normal person would pivot. They'd hire a PR team or write something more commercial. He just doubled down.
A lack of commercial success did not alter his process one bit. And that absolute refusal to carry excess baggage in his life extended directly to the page.
How so?
Just like he didn't want the distraction of a comfortable home, he didn't want the distraction of traditional grammar.
Oh, which brings us to how he actually wrote. If you pick up a Cormac McCarthy book, the very first thing you notice is what isn't there.
Exactly.
He had an absolute hatred for punctuation. He refused to use quotation marks for dialogue. He famously said there was no reason to blot the page up with weird little marks.
Yeah, he thought semicolons were idiocy.
Idiocy.
He relied almost entirely on simple declarative sentences, capital letters, periods, and the occasional comma.
And instead of using commas to separate clauses, he utilized a grammatical technique called polysyndeton. Right.
That's right. He would string together these long, flowing, biblical-sounding sentences just using the word and. Like, and they rode on, and the wind blew, and the sky turned dark.
He actually went out of his way to aggressively edit other people's commas, too. I read he copy-edited an article for the Harvard Business Review.
Oh, yeah?
And physics papers for scientists at the Santa Fe Institute just so he could go in and strip their commas out.
It's a brilliant manifestation of his philosophy. You strip away the ornamental to reveal the structural.
Wow.
And considering he wrote millions of words this way, his physical tools matched that bare-bones philosophy perfectly.
Wait, I was wondering about this. What kind of setup did he actually use for all those decades? Was he writing by hand?
In the early 1960s, he bought a portable mechanical typewriter, an Olivetti Typewriter 32, at a Knoxville pawn shop for $50.
$50.
And he proceeded to type every single draft, every single letter, on that exact machine for nearly 5 decades. We were talking roughly 5 million words.
A mechanical typewriter for 50 years? I can't imagine how many times that thing must have broken down. How did he maintain it?
His maintenance routine was literally taking it down to the local gas station and blowing the dust out of the keys with an air hose.
You're kidding.
That's it. And then in 2009, this $50 pawn shop typewriter goes up for auction at Christie's. They estimated it would get maybe 20 grand.
Okay.
It sold for $254,500, which he immediately donated to the Santa Fe Institute.
$250,000. And then what did he write on?
A friend bought him an identical replacement Olivetti typewriter for $11.
That's amazing.
Plus shipping.
Oh, of course, plus shipping. That is just phenomenal. But let's dig into the why of this. Why does his syntax and his lack of punctuation actually matter? How does it change the experience for the reader?
It's a good question.
Because when I think about it, it's like taking a race car and ripping out the dashboard, the radio, and the seatbelts just to make it go faster. By removing the quotation marks and the attributions, the he said, she said, he removed the fences between the characters and the reader.
Precisely. Think about how your brain processes reading. When you see quotation marks, your brain categorizes that as a specific type of information. It's a signpost.
Right.
When you remove those signposts, the reader can't passively consume the text anymore. It forces you to pay closer attention. You have to completely immerse yourself in the flow of the dialogue and the rhythm of his world to know who is speaking.
Ah, I see.
It induces a kind of hypnotic, immersive state.
Yeah.
You are dropped directly into the environment without a safety net.
And what an environment it is, because that stripped-down elemental engine of his prose was really the only way to drive through the worlds he was building, the worlds that were, to put it mildly, deeply brutal.
The turning point for his career, where he finally gets some breathing room to build these worlds, comes in 1981. He's awarded a MacArthur Fellowship.
The Genius Grant.
Exactly. And he received this largely because literary heavyweights like Saul Bellow and Shelby Foote forcefully recommended him to the committee.
And he uses that money to travel the American Southwest to research his next book, which becomes Blood Meridian.
Yes.
It was initially snubbed by a lot of critics who didn't know what to do with it. But today, it is widely considered his magnum opus. The literary critic Harold Bloom called it the greatest single book since Faulkner's As I Lay Dying.
Some academics even argue it's the great American novel.
But it is incredibly relentlessly violent. The New York Times called it the bloodiest book since the Iliad.
And this is a crucial point. This wasn't violence for shock value. It wasn't like Hollywood action.
Yeah.
It was deeply intrinsically tied to McCarthy's worldview. He was quoted in an interview saying, "There's no such thing as life without bloodshed."
He actually went further than that. He said, the notion that humanity can be improved, that everyone could eventually live in perfect harmony is a, quote, really dangerous idea.
Yeah.
He believed that desiring that kind of utopian harmony will enslave you and make your life vacuous.
Which is a remarkably bleak outlook.
Mm-hmm.
He views violence as an elemental force of nature, like a hurricane or an earthquake. You can't reason with it.
Right.
After Blood Meridian, he finally breaks through to massive mainstream success with All the Pretty Horses, which wins the National Book Award.
Mm.
And then comes No Country for Old Men.
Which gets adapted by the Coen brothers into an absolute cinematic masterpiece, winning Best Picture at the Oscars.
Right. And what's fascinating about No Country is that it was originally written as a screenplay, which perfectly explains why the book is so heavy on rapid-fire dialogue and so sparse on setting description.
Ah, that makes total sense.
The stripped-down style fit the screenplay format perfectly.
Yeah.
And a huge theme in that story is the sheer ineptitude of authority and law enforcement.
The good guys, like Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, are completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. They realize that the rules and laws they represent are just an illusion, a thin veneer over the chaotic, elemental violence represented by the killer, Anton Chigurh.
It's the realization that you cannot police human nature. And then he strips away society entirely, and we get to the road.
The road, yeah.
He's staying in a motel in El Paso with his young son. He looks out the window at the city at night, and he just starts imagining what it will look like in 50 or 100 years.
He pictures fires up on the hill.
Right, and everything being laid to waste.
Right.
That late-night vision turns into this Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about a father and son walking through a freezing apocalyptic wasteland hunted by cannibals.
It's terrifying.
And what grounds that unimaginable horror is that many of the conversations between the father and son in that book were verbatim conversations McCarthy actually had with his own son.
That intimate connection is what anchors the narrative. It grounds the bleakest landscape imaginable in this profound, desperate, very real love between a parent and a child.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you have this extreme violence and bleakness in his work. And in one of his rare interviews, McCarthy said he didn't understand writers like Marcel Proust or Henry James because they didn't deal with, quote, issues of life and death.
Right.
So I have to ask you, does his absolute obsession with violence and survival make him a nihilist, a pessimist? Or is he actually a highly moralistic writer, just searching for light in the darkest possible places?
Well, that is the exact debate academics have been having about his work for decades. It's heavily contested.
I bet.
Some critics absolutely label his work as nihilistic, pointing to the senseless, unpunished slaughter in Blood Meridian or the terrifying, unstoppable nature of the killer in No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, they call him the great pessimist of American literature, arguing he sees humanity as fundamentally doomed.
But there is a totally different way to read him. Yes. Other scholars argue that Blood Meridian is actually a Gnostic tragedy, a deep spiritual exploration of evil.
Yeah.
And when you look at the road, Many academics point out that it depicts a deeply individual, secular morality.
How so?
The father and the son in that book are constantly talking about carrying the fire. They are keeping morality and human goodness alive within themselves when the rest of the world has completely abandoned it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very stark, stripped-down kind of morality, but it is undeniably fiercely present.
He strips down his life, he strips down his punctuation, and he strips down human morality to its absolute barest element. A father protecting his son at the end of the world.
Exactly.
So he writes The Road, he wins the Pulitzer Prize, he has Oscar-winning movies, Oprah Winfrey picks his book for her club, and he actually does a rare TV interview with her. He has finally achieved the absolute pinnacle of literary fame. He has money, he has universal acclaim. So what does he do next?
He completely rejects the literary world.
At MacArthur fellowship reunions, he literally shuns the other famous authors so he can go hang out with whale biologists and physicists.
He had a profound aversion to the literary establishment. He much preferred the company of scientists, people who were dealing with hard facts and the physical universe.
Right.
He became a trustee at the Santa Fe Institute, which is a highly prestigious multidisciplinary research center focused on complex adaptive systems, things like economies, ecosystems, the human brain.
And he didn't even have a formal scientific background. The physicist Murray Gell-Mann said something to the effect of, "There's no place like the Santa Fe Institute, and there's no writer like Cormac, so they fit together perfectly."
Yeah.
He was just absorbing all this high-level theoretical physics and math.
And his time there actually led to his first piece of published nonfiction in his entire 50-year career, an essay called The Kekule Problem.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He writes this essay analyzing a dream by a 19th century chemist, Auguste Kekule. But what he's really doing is exploring the human unconscious and the origins of language. McCarthy's theory was that the unconscious mind is simply a machine for operating an animal. It's an ancient biological system. And he argued that language is not biological. It's a purely human cultural invention.
That's a huge distinction.
Yeah. He said the unconscious mind predates language entirely, which is why our subconscious communicates with us in dreams and images, not in words.
It shows how deep his intellectual curiosity ran. He wasn't just interested in telling stories, he was trying to drill down into the fundamental mechanics of human consciousness.
Yeah.
And you see the influence of these scientists heavily in his final two novels, The Passenger and Stella Maris, which were published just a year before his death.
And Stella Maris, notably, was his first novel since the 1960s to feature a female protagonist.
Right. And both of these books are deeply analytical, grappling with quantum mechanics, mathematics, and the nature of reality.
There's a quote from him that just floors me. After all the literary awards, all the masterpieces, McCarthy stated, writing is way, way down at the bottom of the list of his interests.
Unbelievable.
So, what does this all mean? How do we synthesize a man who writes the great American novel but claims he cares more about theoretical physics?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, McCarthy's ultimate pursuit was never literary fame. It wasn't about being a writer in the societal sense of the word.
Right.
His pursuit was a relentless, uncompromising quest to understand the mechanics of reality. Whether he was exploring that through the bloody instinctual history of the American West, or the post-apocalyptic survival of a father and son, or the evolutionary origins of human language at the Santa Fe Institute, he was always asking the exact same foundational questions about what it means to be alive, to survive, and to be conscious. The typewriter was just the tool he used to explore those questions.
So let's bring this all together for you listening. We've journeyed through the life of a man who sacrificed every conventional comfort for his craft, who ripped the commas and quotation marks out of his sentences to pull you deeper into his worlds, who stared unflinchingly at the darkest, most violent aspects of human nature to find a sliver of meaning, and who, in the end, sought his answers in the company of scientists rather than fellow novelists.
In an era defined by constant self-promotion and a desire for immediate recognition, McCarthy's commitment is a radical act. He did the work purely for the work's sake.
Which brings me back to that opening image. The man in the dairy barn choosing the lake and the beans over the $2,000 speaking gig because everything he had to say was there on the page.
Right.
He believed the work should speak entirely for itself. But there is one final, fascinating detail we have to leave you with.
Oh, this is great.
When Cormac McCarthy died in 2023 at the age of 89, he left behind a personal library of roughly 20,000 books. And over 2,000 of those books contain his own handwritten annotations. Right now, the Cormac McCarthy Library Project is working to digitize all of this. So for a man who famously stubbornly refused to explain his work or talk about his influences, what hidden keys to his genius are sitting in the margins of those pages, just waiting to be decoded by anyone curious enough to look?
It's the ultimate final mystery from a writer who masterfully guarded his inner world.
Everything he had to say was on the page. But maybe, just maybe, the secrets of how he said it are hiding in the margins. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.